The Deandre Ayton market thins. Kevin Durant sweepstakes are on and more from a busy, busy week in the NBA on today's Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on draft night and every day. You can follow us on any podcast platform to make sure you do not miss anything every day in your feed. And if you're finding us on YouTube, that's the best way to support the show. Hit subscribe down below and drop me a comment telling me who you think is the most logical, likely Deandre Ayton landing spot after all of this week's festivities. We're going to hit on the market after the Jeremy Grant trade and after everything that went down in the draft for Deandre Ayton, what I think the Suns' options are in the trade market going forward. Talk about Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and the ongoing drama over in Brooklyn. And then I want to give you a few thoughts on this ESPN story about the Suns front office, what I think it actually means and sort of where really it will take us down the line. I think there's some things to really freak out about. There's some less so. James Jones actually also spoke with us today after the draft, the rare James Jones appearance for the media. So lots to add to that, including just kind of his overall viewpoints of it. But let's start with the Detroit Pistons. They are one of the winners of the draft, I think you would have to say. They traded Jeremy Grant earlier in the week. They effectively turned Jeremy Grant into the number 13 pick in this year's draft, which became Jalen Durant, who was the Memphis big man who had a nice season as a freshman for Penny Hardaway. And I don't know the Memphis, what are they, the Huskies? And then they also drafted Jaden Ivey at number 5. And that was, for those of us who like to just geek out about the NBA, I think that was an awesome outcome because Ivy fits perfectly well with Cade Cunningham, their number 1 overall pick from last season. And they have themselves a nice little core now. Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Sadiq Bey, who was a draft pick in 2020, and then Jalen Durant. I think those 4 guys are a heck of a group to build together. If you remember, Bey scored 53 freaking points in a game last year. And then obviously the pedigree of Cade and Jaden Ivey is obvious. We'll see what Durant develops into as a big man in the modern NBA. But that's a nice young core. What we heard after all of that played out was James Edwards of The Athletic reporting that the Pistons are happy with their young core, with their new core. The fact that they were able to go out and get Durant, apparently a player that they were willing to draft at number 5 if Ivy had been gone, change things for them, and that they don't want to skip steps. Like, this was a move forward to add more young talent to maybe start to, I don't really think that they were trying to tank last year, to be honest with you. Cade won them some games at the end of last season, but this is them saying, hey, we're going to continue to grow and win and build with our young core. But we are definitely not in the business of, I guess you would say, getting a big fish like Deandre Ayton. So that's where the Pistons are. Portland reportedly out. That's been there for a while. Charlotte tonight drafted Mark Williams of Duke. They already also have Kai Jones from last year. So they have put some resources into the center position already, in addition to PJ Washington, who's kind of a combo big for them, already playing big minutes. Miles Bridges is really like a 4. So they have some front court talent. I've never felt super locked into the Charlotte idea anyway. We have not heard a lot of momentum behind that one, so I'm not taking that super seriously as things currently stand. And then San Antonio tonight, they have been a team linked to Ayton in the past, but they drafted 3 wings tonight. They've drafted high and they've drafted well for several years now. They have lots of good young players. And to me, it just doesn't seem like they're really trying to turn any big stones over and make a big splash. They seem to be okay to build through the draft and continue to grow young players. And we also heard this week that DeJounte Murray seems to be very available. You had Jake Fisher reporting that. You had it backed up by Zach Lowe on television on Thursday. So if they want to trade Murray, who's sort of aging out and pricing out of their younger core pieces, same thing we saw them do with Derek White, getting 2 first-round picks basically for him. Why would they want to go out and get Deandre Ayton on a max contract? Murray is 2 years away from probably being a max player. Derek White had already gotten a pretty big payday, and they got rid of one, want to get rid of the other. Why would they bring Ayton in on a big money salary? I don't exactly get the thinking there. What does that leave us? Well, the Hawks, who still have not traded John Collins, although everybody told us they would before the draft, the Toronto Raptors, and the Indiana Pacers. It seems like the Pacers are, in fact, ready to rebuild. Malcolm Brogdon seems to be very available. There's still potential, I guess, that the Knicks would go out and get him. They seem to be ready to tear things down and rebuild a little bit. They got, who did they get in the draft? Ben Mathurin from Arizona. So I think that them trading Brogdon or Turner makes some sense. I think that from the Hawks standpoint, it's probably going to be Collins or Herter. Gallinari is just not really the type of player the Suns need right now. Bogdanovic is hurt a lot. I don't know if his knee it's been off for a while. So Collins or Herter there. And then Toronto, OG Anunoby seems to be somewhat available still. It seems like the Trailblazers might be making a push, although they just made their pick instead of dealing it for anybody. And then Gary Trent Jr. on the Raptors side of things could be an option as well. That's 3 teams. Until we hear anybody else, I think it's going to be one of those 3 teams or the Suns are going to keep him. After all this, yes, I'm back to talking about the Suns potentially keeping Deandre Ayton, partially because of this. A couple things. Here's what James Jones said today. He said, quote, Deandre Ayton, well, he didn't say the Deandre Ayton part. He said that Ayton is, quote, a big part of what we do after being asked about Ayton, and that, quote, we want to keep this team together. So striking a similar chord to what we heard him say after the end of the season on whatever day it was midweek after Game 7 of the Dallas series that he spoke to us. He said a lot of these same things then that he's continuing to say now. And I understand there's maybe part of it that if they did end up getting rid of him, it's posturing, it's leverage stuff, it's whatever. But I also think you got to somewhat take him at his word. He's being very definitive. He's not saying, we think a lot about DeAndre and we're going to see how the process plays out. That's one way to do it. It's not rude. It's not stepping on anybody's toes, but it is a little bit more hedge than all-out support, and he's not doing that. The betting odds also. They've had the Suns in the lead to keep Ayton's services the whole time, and they went even more in that direction this year. So when you look at what the other teams are doing and where the Suns are and what James Jones is saying, I feel like I was at maybe a 25%, a quarter or so chance in my mind that the Suns were going to keep him heading into this week. I'm at maybe 33% now. It has moved up a little bit, but I'm still not at 51. I'm still thinking that they get rid of him. I just think there's been too much momentum on that side of things between the relationship stuff and all the trade rumors that we've heard, all the interests that we've started to now hear about as well. But I feel like it's more possible than I did 3 days ago. So the other domino to fall, very clearly, is going to come from Brooklyn in this big NBA offseason, which feels like it is just really getting started. So we'll talk about the Kyrie Irving news and what that means for Kevin Durant. First, though, we are giving away a incredible, I don't even know. Big news. The one and only NBA Jam is back, and Arcade 1-Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq edition machine. I played NBA Jam for as long as I can remember. I played it on my iPod Touch. I played it at arcades growing up. I've played it on consoles before. It's the best game ever. They're not lying to you. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitalized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from Arcade 1-Up. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1-Up is the place for fun They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $399. Check it out. A free NBA JAM Shaq edition to one special Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win the NBA JAM Shaq edition. Don't miss out. Enter today. Coming back with more on Kyrie Irving, news coming early on Thursday that Kyrie was seriously contemplating leaving the Nets. He has a wish list in that potential departure, including the Lakers. Kevin Durant is expected to explore his options if Kyrie is indeed traded or opts out. And Kyrie might do something crazy like take the mid-level exception from the Lakers, reportedly. Opt out if he has a player option of about $33 million for next season, and there's a belief that he could seriously take a really small contract to go to a destination that suits him better. Now, what suits him better, I think, is still a mystery. I think what he wants, where he wants to be, what he wants to be doing is a mystery. But that's not really the Suns' concern, to be honest with you. I don't think that they're going to pursue Kyrie Irving at all. But who they might pursue is Kevin Durant, right? And again, Shams had this, that Kevin Durant is expected to consider his options if Kyrie does leave. You had Woj saying that Kevin is sort of monitoring this stuff, but not exactly. It's not a lock that if Kyrie left that Durant would ask out. I don't really, that's not a very substantive report. Neither was Shams's, to be completely honest. But if any of us were Kevin Durant right now, I think we'd be looking at our close friend and best teammate. And if he just straight up goes elsewhere, I don't really know what is keeping KD there, right? I don't think winning a title is like the ultimate goal for Kevin Durant right now. I think he's done that. He's achieved great things. He's an MVP in this league. He has had his legacy cemented in more ways than one. But I think we also still have to be realistic. Playing with whatever they might trade Kyrie for, or if Kyrie just straight up leaves, that is a just end of the line for this whole thing, because they have no way to replace him, really. Kevin Durant's not going to play with Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, and, Bruce Brown. I mean, that team is just not good enough to be worthwhile for him. So I think we are on the precipice of a real sweepstakes here. I think it's on the table. It's likely. So here's how I see it. I think the Suns jump to the top of, I'm not saying I don't know what he wants. I'm not going to pretend to. But they jump to the top of a list of teams that could realistically trade for him and might be desirable landing spots, places that he could win, places that are comfortable from a location, geography, market standpoint. I think that the Suns would be there. I mean, I've said this from the absolute beginning when we first heard that KD wasn't really talking to the Nets front office after their playoff loss. I think the Suns are there. I think the Clippers are there. I think the Miami Heat are there. And I think the Philadelphia 76ers are there. There might be others. I don't really buy the Dallas thing. I think Toronto is a place, and despite, it being a really fun city and a winning franchise and a great culture, players still have not seemed to jump over, move heaven and earth to get there. I don't think he's going to the Celtics. I don't think he's going to his hometown Wizards. I don't think he's trying to go back to the Warriors. I don't think he's going to I thought about Portland, but I just don't think that team is automatically good enough. They've already been making moves also elsewhere that make me feel like they wouldn't even really feel like they're monitoring that situation. So I have the Suns, the Clippers, the Heat, and the Sixers. I mean, that's just a guess, but this situation has already moved really quickly. It's moved really quickly. And these things tend to do that in the NBA. The Harden thing, think about that. It was one day everybody was telling us, this situation is completely fine. We're going to keep winning. James is just dealing with an injury, and we're going to get Kyrie back hopefully eventually when the laws change, and then we're going to make a championship run. And then before you knew it, they were trading Harden. They were lying about another injury about Ben Simmons out of nowhere, and then they were getting Kyrie back on the court sooner than they said they were going to, right? Like, these things are crazy. The NBA is insane. When there's a lot of money and a lot of ego and a lot of personality on the line, then these things happen. So don't be surprised, though, despite all that, if the NBA chatter kind of goes quiet for a little while. I think that is something that I think that could have even explained why there wasn't a lot of people were saying there were going to be so many trades in this draft, and there really were not. So I think that could even explain tonight's draft quietness, is the fact that if these types of momentous franchise-altering players are truly available, Kyrie to a lesser extent, but especially Kevin Durant, everything else sort of freezes. We don't have that big free agent or that big will they, won't they trade guy. We didn't think we were going to have one, so we didn't. NBA teams have been doing their business. Portland might not have traded for Jeremy Grant if they knew that there was a potential for KD. But now, if this is real, and I do think it is, I think we could see some radio silence a little bit. I think the Suns are going to make as good of a pitch to win and be in a comfortable environment as anybody can. They have the trade piece with Ayton to make it worth the Nets' while. I think the Suns will be right at the center of this if indeed it gets to that point. So obviously just going to be something we continue to monitor until the real domino falls of Kyrie actually leaving. I mean, when that happens, then this will really be game on. But we have 7 days until free agency really starts, until this moratorium period and all that stuff really kicks off. So we'll see what happens between now and then. If anything happens, I will do a bonus episode the instant that I possibly can. You can rest assured there. We're going to have another episode tomorrow as well, guys, to keep this conversation rolling. I missed one midweek. I thought I could do it from a hotel room, and everything just did not work for me. So keep it right here. I'm going to close out today's show with some thoughts on this Suns front office piece, because I do think it's interesting. I want to give you guys my perspective on it, because there's been a lot of Suns fans freaking out. There's been a lot of NBA fans in general kind of laughing at the Suns. James Jones answered on it a little bit today. So let's dive into it a little bit, be a little bit smarter about how we think about it. First, though, today's show also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net has you covered all year long with the latest odds, props, and lines, and more of them than ever before, whether that's on the Stanley Cup Final, whether that's on the baseball regular season, you name it. We got boxing, golf, Wimbledon coming up. All of it is available to be bet on and inform yourself on at BetOnline. They have the latest, again, they have odds, props, and lines to bet, but they also have the latest news and analysis, scores, even podcasts to inform your betting. Let's see what the latest NBA stuff is. I'm sure they have some free agency props here. Basketball, NBA. Not NBA, basketball game. NBA specials. Here we go. Nope. So much about the Lakers. So much about the Lakers. To make the playoffs, yes or no for the Lakers? Yes is minus 240 next year. No is plus 190. That sounds tasty. No plus 190. You make a little money when the Lakers miss the playoffs. That sounds delightful. All of it constantly updated. You got to be checking every day. Go to the website. That's betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the latest trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So for those of you who maybe don't know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the front office piece, Kevin Arnovitz of ESPN wrote on Wednesday about how the article was called "How the Phoenix Suns Plan to Nail the NBA Draft by Mostly Ignoring It." All right, so let's go through it kind of piece by piece a little bit. So one of the quotes that really stuck out, and James Jones actually even got asked about it today after the draft, was, quote, "By the time we were done, we only had 5 to 7 guys on our draft board." And this was about one of the pre-draft processes that the Suns recently underwent. The article goes on to continue to say, scouts are encouraged to watch practice and understand the Suns NBA squad instead of spending so much time traveling the world writing reports. Jones explained to Arnovitz the process that the Suns do go through, which is a video edit, an evaluation of data, and an intelligence report, and then they just debate it. They just talk through all the aspects of it and debate it, discuss it as a group. And then Jones went on to say, quote, "You're either trying to win or you're not trying to win. Players know every day in the league brings them one day closer to the end of their careers, and I can't waste their days," was what he said. So on the 5 to 7 guys on our draft board, that's the part Jones was asked about today. He made a particular point of saying, look, we don't only evaluate 5 or 7 guys that we just think make the most sense for us. I think what was miscontextualized in this Arnovitz piece, and I'm not saying it was Arnovitz's fault. Maybe Jones said something to that effect and it just didn't get fleshed out enough. I don't know what happened. But what Jones clarified today is he was really referencing a pool that they get to by the end. So he was sort of saying, like, if most NBA teams are realistic with themselves, he did say, we look at every player. But I think what he was getting at is by the time you've looked at it from every angle and been realistic with yourself, there's a cluster of guys who you know really are going to make sense for you, who are a fit stylistically, developmentally, personality-wise, who really make sense, who you would actually draft if the opportunity arose. So I think that makes sense. But on this trying to win or not trying to win part of this stuff, I just can't get around a few things. One is a reminder, the Suns sold their G League team in 2020 at a time when there's extraordinary momentum for all NBA teams to have a direct affiliate. The only two that don't are the Blazers, who have been accused of underspending at times and having an owner who wasn't maybe the most wealthy one that they could have had, and now the franchise is going to be put up for sale. And then the Nuggets, who are serially underinvested in and sell draft picks all the time and have this TV deal thing that was going wrong for a while, and then letting their their president of basketball operations go and this and that, right? Those are the only two other teams who don't have a G League team. The Suns had one and sold it. They also, since two-way deals have existed, I think that they've had both of them filled, both of their slots, for a grand total of maybe a month. Tariq Owens was added just before the shutdown in 2020. I'm not sure he ever actually put pen to paper. And then it was Jalen LeCue was the other one at that time. And then this year, you had Ish Wainwright and Ife Lundberg for less than a month, because by the time Ife came, Wainwright got signed to a full NBA contract just thereafter. Okay. So the idea that you're trying to win or you're not trying to win. Well, if you're trying to win, it's not just about getting players who are win now players. It's about investing in every element of your organization. It's about taking advantage of resources the NBA allows of you and doing it in a way that makes sense. You know, they've also not spent all their mid-level exceptions, and they've never used their biannual exception. These are free agency things. These aren't draft things, but it's just an indication that it might not all be in Jones's hands, but they're not all out dedicated to doing every possible thing that they can do to win, even just from a resource allocation and in like an investment standpoint. Okay, so the next thing that we heard from the Suns in this Arnovitz article is that it says Jones and his staff insist that they're interested in players, not prospects. The Suns say they apply the same criteria used to determine the value of a prospective free agent as they do to the draft. If the player can contribute immediately and if his skill set can fill an explicit role in Monty Williams' system for the upcoming season, he's worth considering. If neither of those measures can be met, he's not for Phoenix. Okay, so the thing that I don't love about this one is I don't mind NBA readiness being a qualification for a draft pick. I don't mind thinking about fit to some degree. I don't think it's the smartest thing to always do, because I think the best players that fit are ones that are just good. You tend to find playing time for players who are good. But the reason that I think this is just a weird sort of position to take if I'm James Jones is the Jalen Smith pick doesn't fill any of these descriptions. Jalen Smith was raw. He wasn't really NBA ready. I think the idea that he could contribute immediately was far-fetched. And the role that he was maybe supposed to fill, I mean, the upside of him was that he was going to be a 4 who could guard multiple positions, rebound, and shoot. If he's a 5, I don't think his body was ready. So that is another knock against his immediate contribution ability. But I also feel like I don't know why you would, if you were drafting for sort of need or role in 2020, I don't know why you would have identified backup center as such a key one. You had Dario Saric already, right? And you had I get they eventually signed Damian Jones. They probably had the idea that they were going to go out and get somebody like that. So the Jalen Smith, which is the most recent pick that they made, doesn't fit what he's saying here. Another quote, and this one is probably the biggest BS one of all. And again, it is not James's fault completely, but here's what he said. The constraints are not financial. We will continue to intentionally build a group that can excel at identifying the modern player as the NBA continues to evolve. So again, if the constraints aren't financial, why sell the Northern Arizona Suns? Why not fill both two-way slots? Why not use every salary cap exception that you can? Why make it such a conversation about the tax, right? I still think the Suns would go into the tax if they had to, but it's a conversation and they're not going out of their way to quiet it. They're saying, yeah, we would go in the right situation. Okay, well, that sounds like a financial constraint. Even it having to be the right situation is a financial constraint. I understand it's extremely expensive to go into the luxury tax. It's there for a reason. Very few NBA teams just stay in the luxury tax in perpetuity. I'm not trying to be unrealistic, but that's a financial constraint. It just is, okay? Another point here, a couple things in terms of personnel. Why not hire more people in the front office? I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. You have Ryan Resch, who's quoted in this article, Zach Amundsen, who's quoted in this article, and Trevor Buckstein, who have all been here since James Jones arrived. The analytics staff includes less than 5 people, and they don't replace some of the talent that they have lost. Ronnie Price, if you remember, was a scout as recently as 2019. I don't know what happened to him. You have Sergio Santamaria, who was the analytics guy who was there when Monty and James Jones first came into place. You have Jake Luce, who was there as the analytics person before that. Jeff Bauer. All these people have left. And Ronnie Price was just a scout, so he's probably been replaced to some degree. Jeff Bauer, I guess, has now been replaced. And that's even what I said when I was talking about the hiring of Morgan Cato. I'm not sure when I talked about it. But the hiring of a person like that was important to me more so than the historicness of her identity and things like that. It's that they actually invested in the front office. The Suns can't expect to keep up with the best franchises if they don't invest, which brings us to our last point here. Quote, this was written from Arnovitz, so this is not something that Jones ever said. I asked him about it in the post-draft thing today. Didn't get a chance to follow up. I hate Zoom. I would have liked to ask him how the Heat have affected his decision-making, but instead I only got to ask him if he felt that had been the case. He said yes, but here's what Arnovitz wrote. In short, Jones sees a Miami in the desert. So Jones did make a point of saying he doesn't want to put the Suns' level of success up against the Heat's. But I feel like Arnovitz probably got this from somewhere. I doubt he just made this all up. I feel like Miami must have come up in these conversations. And even if it hasn't, I think the Heat are a good comparison point because they're one of the best run organizations in the NBA. They are the class of the league in a lot of ways. And they are a team that the Suns likely would be competing against for a title at some point, if that's the ultimate goal, which we know it is. So here's why the comparison point to the Heat doesn't make a lot of sense. Because Miami's recent draft history includes Justice Winslow, it includes Josh Richardson, Bam Adebayo, Precious Achiuwa, all of whom turned into solid role players or even better. And they were projects when they got drafted. The Heat are not a team that only draft these ready-made guys who are ready to plug into a role. The only guy who maybe wasn't a project that they've drafted was Hero, but he was also a one and done. So I don't even think he would fit the Suns mold. So the Suns don't draft like the Heat. That's just not really a reality. And then on top of that, you have the Heat who have used the G League and end-of-bench contracts and things like that to turn guys like Robinson and Vincent, Cody Martin, Hassan Whiteside, Max Strus, Kendrick Nunn, Rodney Magruder. The list goes on into good role players. This is a team that has used the draft and used the G League and used the two-way contract and all this different stuff. They've used every single resource that they can find to make their team better, and they've developed legitimate role players out of it to a point where they can pay Duncan Robinson and then replace him right away because they find a guy like Max Strus who's just a little bit better, right? They can have Kyle Lowry on this big contract, but then have a pretty bad season from Lowry and not miss a beat because Gabe Vincent's just that good. That's what the Heat do. The Suns don't do that. Again, the best franchises invest in the front office. They invest in personnel. They invest in the basketball operations staff. The Raptors have Masai Ujiri. Let's start with the Heat, just to keep on that. The Heat have Pat Riley. They have longtime GM Andy Ellisberg. They also have 3 vice presidents, 2 senior advisors, 2 assistant GMs, 2 directors, 3 analysts, 6 scouts, and 6 analysts in their data analytics department. Okay, that's like 20 people. The Raptors, who I just was about to mention, have Masai Ujiri. They have Bobby Webster. Those 2 have been there for a long time, but they also have 3 vice president level positions, 6 basketball operations director level positions, and 5 scouts listed on their website. The Clippers, who were used as a comparison point for the scouting department, the Suns' entire front office is as big as the Clippers' scouting department. In addition to those 14 scouts, the Clippers have a president of basketball operations. They have a general manager. They have Jerry West as an advisor. They have 4 directors, and they have 7 in their analytics department, which is like 30-person front office. As I've repeated multiple times now, I don't think a lot of this is James Jones' fault. I don't think he doesn't make the calls. If it was his wallet and he had millions or billions of dollars, my expectation is he would probably be a little bit more spendy because he understands that that's what it takes to win. I think he gets that. I don't think he's a dumb team builder. Clearly, it would be silly to even try to make that argument. I don't think this article necessarily painted Jones that way. What I don't understand is why he went so far to defend his boss and to try to make the claim that these things are not financial, when a lot of Suns fans, I think, rightly understand that that's just the fact of the matter. It's just the reality. So why make up an alternative? The Suns have made decisions that show that they are not able to spend the absolute full amount that they might like to. They've done that. We know it. It's not a secret anymore. So why pretend otherwise? The Suns this draft today, they did not trade into the first round. They did not trade into the second round, and they have not signed an undrafted free agent to a 2-way contract, to a summer league contract, anything. That's just ignoring certain resources. It just is. And a lot of it seems like it must be financial. So we'll see what they do. We'll see what they do the rest of the way. They did nothing with this draft, and they did nothing with last year's draft, but they've been pretty darn good anyway. So it's not to say nothing will happen. If they end up with Kevin Durant, we'll all probably be giggling about that ESPN Kevin Arnovitz piece, and it won't matter. And they'll be right back at the top of title contention anyway. We'll close out the week with Aaron Edwards tomorrow, but a big thank you guys to making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this post-draft day Friday. I will talk to you guys later today. Until then, go listen to Locked On NBA, where I broke down the draft from a national level here on this Friday. We'll talk to you tomorrow.